All right, welcome everyone to the Wizard of Radical Self-Respect. Today is going to be interview number 21. Can't believe we've done this many already. And today my guest is Dr. Brea. She's a behavioral specialist and a relationship coach, and I look forward to talking to her about attachment styles and all sorts of things. But thank you for coming on the show today, Dr. Brea. How are you?
I'm doing good. This is actually my first live recording of a podcast, so this is really exciting. Thanks for having
Oh,
me
it's a
on.
first for everything.
Yeah, no kidding.
Yeah, I'm sure you'll do great. So don't worry about a thing. But I think a good place to start would be, what are your ideal clients and what are the things that they are struggling with that they should come to you for help with?
Yeah, I think there's a difference between an ideal client and the clients that I usually get, right? My ideal client is somebody that is self-aware, takes radical responsibility of what's theirs, can really see where they want to go, has some discernment and some ability to create movement in their lives. And what I usually get is people that want to be there that aren't quite there yet. And most of the time, it's with an attachment style type of wound coming from an abusive relationship or even a relationship that's gone south with themselves. So I see a lot of people with heartbreak or infidelity, or the question of like, why do I keep choosing the same kind of people over and over again? Or how come I'm so codependent? Or how can I be less clingy? So those are the types of clients that I get. And then we get to the point where I can help them become dream clients of mine when we settle that emotional wound down a little bit and they can start to onboard a little autonomy. They can start to learn how to self-regulate their nervous system. And then we really can get into the magic of how to transform your life from there.
Okay. And I would guess that the anxious attachment styles, they're probably the ones that reach out for help the most, more so than the avoidance or the ambivalence, etc., if I had to get, or dismissive avoidant in particular.
Yeah, yeah. Well, they're
So
the most interested in like tackling it. They want any action. Just give me something to do to fix this. And then of
sure.
course the avoidants are like, no, I don't really feel like I want to do too much of that.
True, true. Now, what are the symptoms of an anxious attachment style?
It's highly personal. You and I had a conversation offline a minute ago about the use of my term occult in my
Mhm.
practice in behavior and relationships. And I think that the big part of that is being that everybody has a little different experience with it. And it's more of an energy than anything else. So the
Okay.
symptoms might look the same on the outside. So my actions might look the same if I'm avoidant or if I'm secure or if I'm anxious, but the energy that I get from it internally, my internal landscape is wildly different. So I might be avoiding a conversation because I am so anxious, or I might be avoiding a conversation because I don't care at all. And those are the two ends of the spectrum. So the hard part is seeing the symptoms underneath the symptoms, the
Mm.
behaviors underneath the behaviors or the messages. And so the why of the behavior ends up telling me so much more than actually the behavior itself does.
That actually makes a lot of sense to me. And I think it's important to note for people that trauma and wounds,
Mm.
they can be similar, but how someone acts on those trauma and wounds or acts on those feelings or the conclusions they draw from those feelings, that's really everything, right? Because even if
Yeah.
it's an avoidant or an anxious attachment, they're symptoms of, I guess, the same wound issue. It just presents itself in a different way.
Yeah, yeah. So one of the things that I like, the biggest kind of areas that I tend to choose from is the Eckhart Tolle's A New Earth ideal on pain body. So he's got
Mm.
this beautiful language around core wound or pain body that tends to coincide with attachment styles or attachment wounds and relational trauma and in such a great way. And so underneath your attachment style ends up being the product of whatever your primary wound is in deep childhood from early attachment and early caregivers. But it's the message that you get from the world. So am I enough? Am I loved? Am I important? Am I safe? And when those answers are no, that becomes our primary attachment wound
Mm.
and our core wound. So, yes, you can have a not enough wound and have either anxious, avoidant, secure, or ambivalent or disorganized attachments. The wound
Sure.
can be the same and the presentation can be wildly different. Yeah. So,
Absolutely. Yeah, that makes sense. I mean, because especially say if there's a narcissistic parent, for example, they can create wounds in their children, but the wounds may turn into different things in
Mhm.
adulthood for those kids.
Yeah.
Some of them might turn into narcissists themselves.
Yeah.
Some of them might turn to the more codependent variety or people pleasing variety.
Mhm.
And they had the same parent, but yet they turned out differently. So that's an interesting thing that happens sometimes too.
Yeah, you internalize the message differently. Different children will get different avenues or spectrums of the behavior from the parent, and so I might, as a child in an abusive parental relationship, I might think, oh, it's my fault, whereas my
Right.
sister might think it's their fault, and that colors our messages completely different.
That's a good way to put it. And if someone's consistently attracting people that aren't good for them, I won't even say just narcissists, but just someone that's not good for them or mistreating them, what do you think could be happening in a situation like that?
Yeah, this is such an important topic, and it's such a good topic, and it's also such a slippery slope because we never want to victim blame. I'm
Right,
never saying that like what you're doing is you're doing this to yourself, right? There's a
right.
nuance to this that's important when we talk about radical self-responsibility. It's not your fault, but it is your responsibility. It's not your fault, but it is
Yeah,
your responsibility.
totally with you there.
Yeah, and so when I talk with my clients, I run that line on how are you showing up in the world? What is the end result that you're looking for? And it comes to that energy of attachment we were talking about. Am I showing up with this, please love me at all costs, I'll be anything that you want me to be? Or am I showing up to this, I don't care who you are, I'm going to be closed, you have to meet me, like I'm so high value that my bar is this high and I'm not going to give anything? Those are two ends of the spectrum. We know what those are
Sure.
called. And there's another option. The other option is, I'm okay with me. I'm okay with you. Doesn't always have to be perfect. Not everyone has to choose me. I don't have to choose everybody else. I'm okay no matter what. And so when we get to this neutrality point, we attract people that resonate with that. And when we are out of our neutrality point, especially in anxious attachment, we will take anything that anybody gives us. It's a Disney princess kind of mentality. Just
Right,
love
right.
me, like make me feel special. I
Sure.
cannot learn how to make myself. I don't feel special on my own. I have no intrinsic value system. No one's ever taught me how to be my own person. So I'm always constantly looking for somebody else that's going to just tell me I'm great. And if you know the game really well on the other side of that spectrum, if you're like, oh, I know how to make someone feel special, even if I don't believe that, so that I can gain control over them, I'm an easy target for you.
Yeah. And then we both know narcissistic people would do that in the love bombing phase. And the people that are in that position mentally that you just mentioned, they are very susceptible to that. And
Yeah.
you said something very important to me too. I'm big on two things can be true at the same time. A lot
Yes.
of people seem to struggle with that. They think, oh, if this one thing's true, it means nothing else can be true. But I
Right.
say, no, it's not your fault that someone mistreated you. And it can also be true that there's probably something you need to improve.
Mhm.
Maybe it's working on your attachment style. Maybe it's learning how to walk away. Maybe it's learning how to not ignore red flags once you see them, or keep in mind what would prompt you to overlook red flags. But there's usually something if you're consistently attracting people that aren't treating you well. And I think how would you even frame it otherwise? Where if it's not anything you can do, then what are you? You're just a powerless victim in that
Mhm.
case. And I can't stand for that. I'm like, no,
No.
no, no. I want to empower people. And you do too.
Yeah. A lot of, I mean, arguably, almost everything in our reality is under our control. If I'm not changing it, I'm choosing it, is kind of the language there. And there's a book called
Ah,
Choice Theory about how, we have a choice of who we're letting in our lives. One of my favorite two truths paradox that I think is really powerful, specifically for this moment, is that it can be true that they are doing the best they can. Like this is parent specific. So it could be true that your parent was performing at the top of their possibility. They were the
right.
best parent they could possibly be, and it wasn't enough for you, and it wasn't good.
Yeah.
Truths. And that can be true also in relationships. You can recognize that someone is doing the best they can. That doesn't mean you stay with them. Someone's doing the best they can. That doesn't mean it has to be enough for you.
Right. And I mean, what you're talking about is nuance. And I love hearing that because it seems so rare these days that people are able to see the shades of gray and
Mm.
not just have it be in black and white. And another cool thing you were talking about there is balance,
Yeah.
where you said someone can have the doormat slash begging people to love them mentality, or then the high value, no one's going to meet my standards mentality. And I see some people, the pendulum can swing too far in that direction eventually. But how would you suggest that people get to that balance point?
Yes, so it's called neutrality.
Okay.
And if you look at the spectrum, vibration is a thing. So go back into the occult aspect of stuff. Energy has a vibration. Emotions have a vibration. The lowest possible vibration you can have is shame and guilt. So when I feel like I'm inherently bad, I have a really low vibration. The highest vibration you can have is creativity or love. And in the middle is neutrality. So the good news is that you don't even have to make it all the way towards the top of the spectrum to get to a balance point. You just have to make it to the middle. Like that's what the balance point is about. And
Cool.
so I keep putting my hand on my heart space because it's a body, it's a felt kinds of sense. When you start to check in with yourself, how do I feel about this? We build intuition and we pair our intuition with our knowledge, like the science meets the occult. We pair it with the truth of our reality. How do I feel and what's really going on here? We can marry those together and we can start to choose things that create neutrality within us. Ooh, this person makes me feel at ease. I don't have to always beg for their information, their input, their time, their attention. Or this person makes me feel at ease. I don't have to give them all kinds of sometimes it's exhausting being the partner to an anxious attacher also. Sure. Right? We polarize each other when we dive into our trauma triggers. It creates more trauma in our relationships. And so getting to neutrality is your responsibility. Nobody knows you like you do. And no one has the right answers for you more so and better than you do. So it's up to you to take the advice of people like us, right? Like I'll tell you what works for most people. I'll tell you what works for me. And then you got to try it out. You got to figure out what works for you. Start to build your own blueprint, your own process for awareness. How do I become aware of when I'm dysregulated? And then repair. How do I come back to regulation? Does that mean I exit? Got to get out of the relationship? Take a pause, go to the bathroom, take deep breaths, take an ice bath, do a meditation. There's 100 different ways that you can bring neutrality into your moment by moment. It's up to you to learn about that and try it out, see what works for you.
Absolutely. And I think a lot of the work that we do, it happens even before we're in the relationship, where how we do things and how we are on our own, if we're not in a good spot going into a relationship, then all of our wounds and the people that cut us will be bleeding all over the place on people. And the other thing that you made me think about here is, you said guilt and shame is the lowest vibration. What are your suggestions to get people to move through that guilt and shame?
I love this question. The best way to move from guilt and shame to neutrality is anger. Because first of all, you have to be mad about how things are going. Like, this doesn't feel good. You can be mad at yourself. Like, oh, I can't believe I'm letting myself be taken advantage of. But that anger actually changes the vibration to something a little bit more towards the neutrality line. So you can get motion in it. Because the further down the spectrum we go with emotion, the heavier and the slower and the more sluggish we feel. That's like depressiveness. So get mad, have a healthy outlet for sacred rage or anger with a trusted person in your life, a coach or somebody, a therapist maybe, and express the ways that you're angry for how you've been treated in the past. Remember, this goes back probably to your primary attachment. Be mad that your parents did the best they could, but they still sucked, or whatever it is, be mad about the fact that you didn't get the childhood that you deserve to have, because most of us don't, and that's okay. But owning your anger on where you're at currently is how you get to where you want to go in the future.
I love that, actually. I wasn't expecting you to say that, but I do love it in the way that you replied to that there, because we got to feel it to heal it, right? And then we feel that anger, it sounds like we will get on the right direction. We'll get towards the right path, so to speak.
When we suppress our anger, we make it our own fault. And obviously having the right amount of personal accountability, responsibility is important. But not everything is your fault, right? Like not everything is your fault. So you have to know what's yours, and then whatever's not yours, you have to shed. At some point we are called to, in order to heal, to let go of some stuff. We don't always get the closure we want. We don't always get the information we want. Sometimes it's just not like that. And
Sure.
so whatever is yours to heal, you keep, and then whatever's not yours, you shed. But if you keep holding on to everybody else's stuff that they keep putting onto you, you get bogged down into this shame and guilt. Oh, I didn't do enough for them. I'm not enough inherently for them. Well, we got to let go of that. That can be true. It can be true that I wasn't enough for them and I'm still a great person. And then I can be mad that that's what happened. I can maybe not mad at them, maybe just mad at the situation. And that moves us up to that healing point.
And how would you suggest people place boundaries in a situation like that, or be assertive in a situation like that, so that the stuff of other people, like other people's stuff, doesn't get stuck on them? That's something I see happen a lot too, especially with the people who consider themselves empaths or good-hearted people. They can't keep themselves healthy and then like deal with other people at the same time, like because they just absorb too much. And is there a way, you think, to kind of keep yourself healthy and try to help at the same time? Are there like boundaries or ways to be assertive in that area?
Yeah, for sure. There's the first kind of rule of that is to fill your cup first, right? So my personal channel, my podcast is about choosing yourself first for all of these reasons. And it's a little kind of counterintuitive, but knowing who you are and making sure that you are regulated in neutrality first is the first part. And that takes sometimes a while to kind of get that dialed in. And then you can have a little bit more disclosure in your life with people without being dysregulated. So when we're talking about boundaries, we're talking about two things. We're talking about disclosure. What am I saying to people? And discernment. How much do I trust them? And so I work with a company called Pivot. I do some contract work for them, and I take clients through Pivot, which is a relational management company. They go through deeply traumatized relationships, and they help them rebuild. And they have a lovely framework for boundaries. It's like this kind of bullseye looking thing where you have outer, like no contact on the outside, and then inner, your personal experience of God on the inside. And then there's layers between it on discernment and disclosure. So if you organize people in your life based on how much you can trust them, then you start to have a better idea of what can I tell them. So boundaries become an internal commitment to myself. So the boundary isn't, I need you to do this. The boundary is, I will no longer discuss this topic with this person because it's not safe for me. So I start pulling my disclosure back, not because I don't love them or because I shouldn't say a bunch of stuff, but because I keep myself safe by holding a boundary in discernment and disclosure appropriately for the people in my life. And that's how we keep people in our lives too. I don't have to cut everybody out. I can just organize them in layers of discernment.
Yeah, I think that's a key point to make there too. One of my favorite definitions of a boundary is the point at which you can love yourself and them at the same time, as opposed to abandoning yourself or betraying yourself in some way, or just being completely selfish about it too. Both of those ends of the spectrum might not be too good.
Right. Yeah. How do I say my truth and be the most authentic version of myself while also being kind and compassionate to others?
So, in your experience as a relationship coach, what do you see as the biggest pain points or conflicts that people seem to really struggle with? Because to me, like from the outside looking in, it seems like it should be so easy. Like just have a safe place to talk about conflicts, be a good team together, like be honest, be open. But for some reason, it never is as easy in practice for a lot of people. But what do you see as a relationship coach?
This is not going to be surprising, but I think you're going to like it too. It's capacity. So we only have 100% of our brain cells. And in order for us to be open, honest, aware, kind, compassionate, creative in our solution building, patient, we have to have capacity. We have to be sleeping well. We have to be eating healthy. We have to be taking care of our own needs. And often we don't do any of those things. And so conflict actually is the squeeze. It's I'm upset and I'm going to lash out at you because you asked me a question that I wasn't prepared for and I don't have time for this. I don't have time for this. I'm so stressed. Work is this and kids are that and all of these things in the world are this. And so my relating style is the thing that suffers the most because I can't be the best version of myself in this conversation. I don't have the capacity for it, because when people are rested, when we're on vacation, right? When we're rested, when we're not rubbed, when we're not activated, we're not triggered, we are way better communicators. We are way better lovers. We are way better friends. And we just don't get to be that version of ourselves very often. And so that's where we have to start recognizing, hey, you know what? I'm kind of a good person, and my partner is actually a really good person too. How do we create lifestyle design where we bake in conflict? Because we're going to have it no matter what. So how do we create space and normalize conflict so that we can actually have open, honest, beautiful discussions without feeling like, is this taking too long? I have other things I got to do.
Right. And I think that brings up another 2 points here that are very important as well. It's like, one, when people are stressed and just with the grind, it does make things harder for people. And I think the more responsibilities people have, the harder it is for them to have that healthy conflict a lot of times. And that's why I admire so much the people that maybe are mothers or single mothers or have all sorts of jobs and responsibilities, but they're still able to keep this happy, positive, energetic energy. Like, to me, that's a superpower right there.
Yeah.
But I mean, so much of a relationship too is, how do you handle someone else's boundaries? How do you handle disagreements? How do you handle being told no? How do you handle solving problems together? Because anyone can get along in the honeymoon phase.
Yeah.
But like, once that honeymoon phase is over, once Disney movie is over, then the real relationship begins.
Yeah.
And there should be some Disney movies about that after the quote unquote happily ever after. It's like, how do you handle those things?
If we can onboard more curiosity, I think, and this is most likely true for everybody listening too. It's like, a lot of the conflict in my relationship was a misunderstanding. Like, I thought you meant something else. We're using the same words. The problem is that when I grew up, my family used it like this. Like, this word meant this to me. And then when you grew up, your family used it this whole different way. And now when I say it, man, that brings back this trauma trigger of something else that I have no idea. You don't even really know. All you know is that it feels bad in your body. Like, all of a sudden I'm feeling like I'm going to throw up, or I'm going to pass out, or I'm getting sweaty, I'm getting angry. And I'm not really registering the behavior yet because I haven't dug into or had that level of awareness. And so here we are thinking that we mean the same things and meaning totally different things. But if we can just decompress and for a moment consider that I might not have the full answer. I think I know you, and I know that you love me. And I know that for the most part, you want our relationship to be, copacetic. So this is very weird that you're having this reaction. I must be missing something. Can you tell me again what's happening here? Like, what does this mean for you? Right. And so when we can slow it down, regulate our own nervous systems, remember, it's not about you. It's probably about them. It's about something going on in their landscape. And if you can help your partner understand that without judgment, blame, shame, then you're going to get so much further. How can I say, hey, what's going on? Like, what does this feel like to you? Where do you think this is coming from? What can I do to help? Can we take a breath together? That helps us reduce the conflict for sure.
And I think what you just said there is so key, where if people can just be a little more understanding and not wanting to pounce and jump down someone's throat, that goes such a far way in creating a safe environment. But a lot of people, they haven't done any work on themselves, or very little, and then they don't have the self-awareness, and they don't know what their triggers are or their wounds are or where they came from. And they're not even able to start the conversation because they're just in reactive mode or acting on the pain body, as our friend Eckhart would say. And from there, it's tough. It's tough. Those people have it tough. They got some work to do. But
I'll share with you, because it's hard. It's difficult in real time to recognize the origin of the trauma, right? Like, I'm not going to say, oh, this is from my childhood. But here's what I can do, is I can recognize a trauma reaction. So again, in Pivot, we use developmental milestones or parts of self-work. So you have an inner child, you have an inner teen, you have an inner adult, and sometimes they get activated for different things. My conflict style, when I'm like ready to fight somebody, it's most of the time it's in my inner teen. And I have noticed now that when I'm about to be in conflict, as opposed to in neutrality, this is what it looks like. Like, I'm going to take a big breath because I'm about to fight you. So I'm going to be like, so now when I'm I'm talking with my husband and he says something and I go, I'm like, oh, just breathe that out first before
There you go.
before I talk, because I know my trauma trigger. I don't know the root cause, but I know what it feels like in my body and how I'm preparing to drop into my activation. Like I know that breath. I know the breath means I'm going in the wrong direction here. The other thing is I know a key word that I say when I'm activated is that's not fair. So when I hear those words come out of my mouth, I know that I'm not in neutrality.
Ooh. Fair is a 4-letter word, they say.
Yeah. And so if you can start to recognize what kicks it off for you, like what's the phrase or a feeling in your body maybe, or like if you're going to sit up straighter, or if you're like, like what does your fighting stance look like? When you're starting to armor yourself for a battle, notice what that looks like and feels like in your body, and then diffuse it on your own.
Right.
Whew, take a breath. Melt down, drop the armor, laugh at yourself. Like it's not that serious.
That's a big one too. That's a big one too. I mean, taking that step back in that space is everything, because in that reactive space, things can go off the rocker. But when you take a step back, and that's another thing that you said too there that I think is very important. When people are struggling, often they're taking things too seriously, and they got to remember, have a sense of humor, be a little more lighthearted about things. That helps a lot of people too. But taking things very seriously, just for me, it puts things in the bad space sometimes. Where I remember, sometimes you just gotta laugh, because laughter can be the best medicine at some points.
We don't always believe or subscribe to or agree with everything we think, and we certainly don't, especially in conflict, believe, subscribe to, or agree with everything we say. And sometimes we say some dumb stuff and we don't mean it, right? And so almost everything that comes after my is going to be terrible, and I'm not even going to believe it. It's just whatever fighting words are going to come out. And so whatever I say, it ends up being so funny, because my husband will he'll laugh at me and he's like, oh God, here it comes. And then I'll start laughing. I'm like, oh, that was a spicy one. Like that is I did not mean that. And that's on me to heal. Appreciate you hearing that out for me. And also please don't take that with any truth, because it's just, I'm tired, or I have low capacity, or I need a snack, whatever, dumb little things. We're all kindergartners at the end point here. We need sunlight and water and sleep. So I think that, you start to be curious about even your own reactions. Wow, where's that coming from? Gosh, that is kind of funny, especially if you have kids, you can see it in yourself a little bit easier, but especially when you can be the watcher and you see like your younger parts of self just like throwing a fit. Like it is kind of cute sometimes. It's kind of silly. It's kind of like, they're doing the best they can in that active state. That's whatever is available to you.
I like that.
Yeah, it's still your responsibility as soon as you can to recognize that, come back to neutrality, and deal with it.
Yeah, I think the curious mindset is a big one. And it sounds like with you and your husband, for example, you give each other a lot of grace and understanding. And that goes such a far way with a lot of this. And another thing I wanted to mention to you about the fear of abandonment. What are your suggestions for people that really struggle with a fear of abandonment, which is, I guess, similar to an anxious attachment? But what would you say to the people who are struggling with that?
Do you want to get a little controversial?
Why not? Why not?
You cannot abandon an adult. We are capable of meeting our own needs. No one can abandon you. You can self-abandon for sure, but you are an autonomous person that is capable of meeting 100% of your needs. Not that it feels good, right? We absolutely want community and we want relationships. For sure, it feels better to be in community. But as far as a basic need goes, you can do all of that on your own. No one is abandoning you. There's no possible way for you to be abandoned. Someone can leave you, that can decide to not be there in your life anymore. And that does suck, but that's not an abandonment. So the abandonment is a very specific thing. It's when you are not able to manage life, you will not survive on your own, and someone takes your basic needs away. That's abandonment. It cannot happen to you after a certain age. And so
I see what you're saying with that.
Yeah.
Now, maybe I should frame it differently then. Maybe I should frame it as people who are afraid of someone leaving them.
Yeah.
What would you say then?
Yeah, and it does come, it's a nuance, like we talked about before. It comes down to regulating your nervous system against the feeling of lack mentality and recognizing that you are okay. You can be okay regardless of what happens. The mantras that we can use there, it's like, yeah, life is hard, but I'm capable. I can do hard things. I don't want to do another heartbreak. I don't want to do another move. I want to kick and scream and pretend like life is over, but life is not over.
Right.
Even when terrible things happen, like people die, even when terrible, unimaginable, shitty things happen to us, we're okay. We can get back to a regulated nervous system. We can get back to purpose and value and vision in our lives. You are capable of that. So just reminding yourself that even if it's unfair, even if the worst possible thing does happen to you, you're going to be all right. You're okay.
Right.
And it is your responsibility to remind yourself of that. Most of the time when we're afraid of abandonment, it's from the inner child wound. So we're embodying the fear of truly being abandoned, not surviving this. Like, I'm going to die. That's dropping into our inner child wound. And so when you can remember that, you don't have to stay there. You can visit that wound and you can work with it. That's not where you live. You are a functional, very capable, autonomous being that has survived every single hard day to this date, and you will continue to survive that in the future.
Right.
It feels hard. It's not impossible.
I think it's big to be very mindful of the stories that we tell ourselves. And if someone leaves, people tell themselves a story. It's
Yeah.
just a matter of what that story is. And
Mhm.
intellectually, I definitely agree with what you said. Yeah, of course we can move on. Of course that we can like make it a story that doesn't say anything bad about us. It was just something, their behavior was because of them. Like they did what they did, wasn't because of me. And intellectually, I certainly know that. Sometimes you still feel it though. You might still feel the feelings, and I think that part's normal. But I do
Yeah.
want to ask you this too. I think one of the only trust issues that I have anymore is, and intellectually, I know the right answer to what I'm about to ask you,
Sure.
but it still doesn't negate the feeling, I should say. And the feeling is, I don't trust people to stick around if their feelings change. Like
Yeah.
and I know intellectually, I know, well, that just means they're not for you, or that wasn't a good match, or whatever. But that is still the feeling that I can get sometimes. So what would you say to me in that
Yeah.
case?
It is about being able to be in reality with that. So remember we talked about those like two, like holding two truths, right? Like
Right.
the underlying behavior or the underlying core belief is that it's not worth it unless they stay. So
Okay.
we think about that, like, is it still worth it for the experience, even if there's a possibility of them leaving? The answer is yes. And so that's what we have to anchor back into, is that, this is a sucky thing. It's hard to get to gratitude if you can't even get to neutrality, but gratitude for the experience, regardless of the outcome. And one thing that softens that a little bit is, can I be the best version of myself in this relationship? If the answer is no, then I'm grateful for the parting of this too. Even though I want to stay, even though I've been really warring with it and I want to keep them and I want to figure it out. If I'm not being the best version of me, they're not being the best version of them. There's just so much gratitude in learning that this new evolution is coming, and then being able to allow yourself the space to be the next big version of
Right.
you without them. So we're managing and tolerating this expression of, like, is it failed love? Is it failed love if it didn't meet the requirements of longevity for us? And the answer can be no. That any love that we experience is always a step in the right direction. It's always a positive thing, and we work towards the longevity that makes sense for us. And then we manage and tolerate when that ends. And it's a natural part of relationships.
And I think that's a good way to frame it there too. Just because something ends doesn't mean it's a failure, doesn't mean it wasn't a good thing, doesn't mean that it wasn't supposed to help us on our journey in some way.
Right.
And you also reminded me of, I'm not sure if I believe in soulmates, but I heard a good definition of soulmates the other day. And it said the person that helps you to be the most you can be,
Mhm.
and forces your soul to grow the most as a person, keeping in mind that not all growth is comfortable. Thoughts?
Yeah. There's a book. Do you know Paulo Coelho? He wrote The Alchemist.
Yeah.
One of my favorite books ever. he wrote another book about soulmates. I can't remember what the name is. I think it's called like Brea. So it's about a woman, she's a witch and she learns about soulmates. And the idea of soulmates in this book is that you have 5 or 6 of them in your lifetime. And
Okay.
and you don't have, and they're not always romantic, right? So soulmates can be platonic and they can be parental, but they
Sure.
have like pieces of soul that recognize your soul that help you grow. And so when we take the romantic implication out of the idea of soulmate, it makes a lot more sense. The difference is the expectation that we put on somebody else. So if you're expecting them to meet all of your needs or to make you grow in a direction, if you're giving them all the weight of your personal growth, that's going to be difficult for you to manage. And you're certainly going to miss that loss, right? Like if
Right.
you believe that you cannot be your best self without them, then that feels difficult. But if you recognize that it's all just exposure along your journey and that you have capacity, autonomy, like we were talking about, over your own expression, regardless of what people do in your life, it becomes a little easier to manage that.
Right. And I think, especially in the modern day now, people have many relationships. It's not the norm that people just get with one person and then stay with them their whole lives. I would
Mhm.
say that's certainly the minority now. And even
Yeah.
people who get married, a lot of people get married several times. So the idea of 5 or 6 soulmates, I can get behind that in that regard for sure.
Yeah.
And I think another big thing people would struggle with here is like in my coaching practice, a big thing women say to me is they just don't know how to be attracted to someone who is quote unquote good for them. That
Mm.
they need the emotional roller coaster or a little bit of the dark triad or something. What would your suggestions be to the women in that place?
We continue to choose something that's painful until we learn the lesson. So my advice to them is keep choosing that until you're sick of it. Then once you're sick of your own stuff, once you're sick of being treated like that, just know that that's a choice. Like, okay, so you can't feel a certain way in your relationship unless it's that way, then that's the relationship you're always going to have. Are you happy with that? Are you excited about this outcome? How do you feel? I worked with Dr. Judd Brewer, a neuroscientist, on a behavioral analysis that I did for a company called ShareCare a while ago. And he has this revolutionary idea on smoking cessation. So how do you get rid of your desire for a bad habit? And it's the disillusionment. You see it in reality. Okay. So does it taste good? No, it tastes gross. Does it smell good? No. Does it actually help you feel better? Not really. Then why are you doing it? Now, if
Right.
you keep doing it after that, that's on you. You don't get to you don't get to claim narcissist about somebody else. No, no, no. That's your choice. You chose into that for that reason. You're using that person, you're pushing them into a
Right.
narcissistic basket so you can say that you are still this empathic victim. No, that's your choice. That's your
Yeah.
choice.
Once they're aware,
Once they're
yes.
aware.
Once they're aware, I would say, yeah, then it becomes their choice. And you do notice, and I see this with men too, there's a lot of people, and there's a codependent version of this and the more narcissistic version of this, but they want to be the person that's the victim complaining about the other person. And the
Mhm.
codependent version of this, which I don't hear as much about, is they're complaining about their narcissistic spouse. And oh, this person's cheating, this person's doing this, doing that, doing whatever. But at the end of the day, they're still there. At the
Yeah.
end of the day, they're not doing something different. Now,
Mhm.
granted, it could be a trauma bond and it might not always be safe to leave. Excluding those things, if it does something for them to be that person in the relationship, I think it, because if that makes them the good guy, right? If the other guy is the bad guy or the bad woman, then they're the good guy by default. And it's a
Right.
sneaky way to play that kind of card.
And that's one thing that we uncover. Probably you do also, but in my practice, what's your value prop? What do you actually, let's talk about the reality. What are you getting out of this?
Right.
Let's see what it is. And once you see the package, your value prop package, oh, this sucks. I thought I was getting so much more out of this. I'm totally not. And then we do some, future visioning. Sometimes people cannot see the possibility of a better future for themselves. It's our responsibility as coaches to help them vision better for what's possible for them and then build a tolerance for it. And especially with women in particular, that keep choosing narcissistic tendency types of partners, we have to help them build a tolerance for neutrality. because they're stuck in shame and guilt. It's not that they like it there, it's just that it's what they're stuck in. Like feeling pleasure, feeling good, feeling autonomous feels bad, feels scary, feels wrong. So when you're talking about not being safe to make a move outside of the relationship, there has to be a window of preparation, right? You certainly don't just like leave it without having any stability, but you can start to create what would it be like? What would need to happen? What are my options? You start to build a pathway towards a more secure future for yourself. If you're not doing that and you know that it's bad, it is just as much on you as it is on them.
Yep. I mean, I agree with that. I agree that once they have that awareness and they know, then what is the explanation at that point? And another thing you made me think of there too, having people ask themselves, why do you want to be in a relationship? What do you think the goal of a relationship will be? And that's where I think you can get to the bottom of some pretty important questions or some pretty important answers, where for some people, if they're honest about themselves, honest about it, they would say something like, well, I kind of want this person to meet all of my needs and to make things all better. I want my life to drastically improve because this person is coming into my life. That's why I think that why is such an important question to ask.
And when you can get into this non-negotiables or value list of what you want your partner to do,
right?
Then read that back and see how many of those you can do for yourself. Are you any of those things yourself? Can you spend a season of your life being your own wants list? Can you spend a season of your life getting so leveled up that you are what you're looking for, and then match with somebody from that energy? Because if you're matching with somebody from the bottom of your capacity, from the lowest, most broken, most desperate position, of course you keep attracting people that love that out of you. They really want that version of you. And then you get stuck in that version of you. That's not who you are. You're playing so small. Like, let's see if we can get you to the best version of yourself before you enter into a relationship, so that you can meet somebody that can match that and then flourish that with you.
Right. And that's always going to be the right thing to do. It's never the wrong thing to do, to work on yourself and to try to cultivate those qualities that you're looking for in somebody else. It's never not the right thing to do. And if, like you said, if you don't have those qualities, what makes you think you're going to attract someone who does?
You won't. Yeah, you won't. Right. There's just not a way for you. And not only will you not attract it, you won't notice it and you won't like it. We just talked about that.
It's a bad. Okay.
I don't like people like that. I don't like balanced people with, even nervous systems that allow me to be in my own mistakes, that don't always fix me, that don't bombard me with love. I don't like that because you can't be it yourself. That's why.
Right. And that's not, I want to be clear. It's not all women who say that to me, that they like that. It's just, there's certainly a percentage that do think that way.
Well, and we're in this business, so we see this is the skew of what we do. So we see women, particularly, I work with some men, but I work with more women also. Right. But they're attracted to me because of the narrative that we're working on together. And I'll tell you that it's my least favorite place to be when a person that I'm working with continues to choose the same lesson over and over again and retains me as their coach. Like, I love that I'm there for them, but it's painful for me too, man. Like, I do not want that for you. And I'm not here to fix you. I'm here to just be along with you on your ride too, until you figure out what else you want. And then I can walk you through the next stage. But this is your choice. This is all you. You get to be in choice on everything that happens in your life.
And I think that's a good way to frame just giving in general, where I have rules for giving, where I say to people, don't give if you have to disrespect yourself to give, and match someone's effort. You can match someone's effort, but the second you want to do more than match someone's effort, there's something going on. There's like, either you want to do too much for them, you're caretaking, or something where
expectation.
Yeah, something's off the rocker when they start doing that. So they're guardrails to me. Those two things, they're guardrails to keep people safe.
I like that.
So you have another controversial, you were going to say, view on narcissism or narcissists. Perhaps we can talk about that now too.
Yeah, I think maybe it's not so controversial, but I think that it is. Most people that I talk with about it, especially people that come in that, we get these anxious attachers that want to bash their spouses for being narcissistic. or
Right.
being narcissists. You keep hearing me say narcissistic tendency because that's how I believe it to be. It's a behavior. It's not an inherent personality trait. They weren't born like this. They might struggle with it just like we have a primary attachment for the rest of our lives. We attach all kinds of different ways in different contexts. And that's true for narcissistic personality disorder, narcissistic tendencies, is that they become more narcissistic depending on areas, environmental issues that they're in. And for the most part, narcissists are just people with deep attachment wounds that have not learned how to meet their own needs. They have these two truths. They hate themselves and they love themselves in crazy measures that are not in reality. And that creates this very volatile experience that other people have because they themselves do not have any access to neutrality. And people do get better with narcissistic tendency with the same things that people with anxious attachment get better on. Personal awareness, agency, willingness, bravery to step into some new behaviors, and then somebody that's there for them. And I think that when we can see the hurt underneath the behavior, it's not the partner's responsibility to do this. I am not saying that this is you. If you are in a relationship with a narcissist, don't do any of this. Get out.
Right.
But that person still, they're not completely a lost cause. They just not the right fit for you. So that's the
Okay.
I guess lesson here is
Yeah,
that
I could see that. I don't think that's really even too controversial either.
no.
And like when you said the black and white or the love and hate yourself thing, that always reminds me of Lord of the Rings with Smeagol and how he loves and hates himself like he loves and hates the ring. Similar. Right. It's similar how like when fiction can kind of mirror and match reality in some cases. But
we have all ugly behaviors that come out of those expressions, and we treat people so unkindly. And if we are honest, we ourselves have acted in narcissistic ways in the past in our relationships also. We have been the villain and the victim in many different ways. And so the biggest lie that I see with narcissism is that people don't change. And that's just not true. They may not be able to change in the environment that you're in with them. They may not change for you or with you, and that's okay. And that's when we exit. But they still have the same choices that everybody else has, the capacity to change, and that's their journey to be on, but it's possible.
I would say as long as the person, and this is what I always say about it, I say if they can admit they have a problem and do all sorts of footwork and become self-aware, then it's possible. Then I think, yeah, you can do some behavior modification. I don't know if you can teach somebody emotional empathy. I think you can teach them intellectual empathy. But do you think you can teach somebody emotional empathy?
Everybody has emotional empathy. Every single person does. And when you don't have emotional empathy, it's because you have locked it out. It's short of like a brain injury, right? So if you have like a actual operating system issue where you have some kind of cognitive impairment, that's a whole different story. But for most healthy brained people, that's a birthright. We have emotional empathy is inherent. We learn how to shut it off in our early attachment when it's unsafe, and then we never access it again. And then anytime we get close to it, it's this like armored shell of like, no way. And so then we fight away from it to defend this very tender part of us that we just have felt this deep sense of unsafety on from such a young age. So it's very similar to most of the core wounds of anxious and avoidant attachments. It's just so buried and so subconscious or unconscious for so long. And it is so forward, like it's primary in their personality and it's consistent. So those are the things like that, when we reduce the consistency, we reduce the activation, we get a little bit more awareness on board, then empathy comes back. We remember that we have that. It's not that we have to teach it, but it can come back.
Yeah, I could see that. And I think the two things I would stress to people are, one, make sure you see any of the changes in the footwork, because depending on the stage that someone's in, like a lot of people who watch this channel, they're either with a narcissist now or just leaving one. And depending on what stage they are in the healing process afterwards, someone who's in the very beginning and they're still trying to go no contact, for example, I got to be careful not to share anything like hopeful about the narcissistic person that they might change. And it's not to say never, but just in the beginning, they're already looking for reasons to go back. So I don't want to give them the reasons, especially when the other person's actions are not following through. But once someone's down the line more, then I would say, yeah, you can believe that a narcissistic person, they can improve, but just make sure you see it with your eyes. Make sure that it's not just you hoping something's going to change. If they're
Right.
doing some action and they're doing some footwork and the follow up is there, I mean, who am I to say in that case that no, they'll never change? It's like
Right.
no, it's I do believe it's a spectrum, and
Yeah.
that's where I think I guess that's where the NPD diagnosis kind of gets people in trouble, where they'll people and doctors even say this too, where people who are doctors on YouTube or just professionals in books, they'll say if they're this, it's extremely unlikely that it'll ever change, and extremely unlikely because they gave them the label of narcissistic personality disorder. And even now, there's a big self-aware narcissistic personality disorder community, which
Mm,
which I have mixed feelings about because,
same.
on one hand, I do truly believe the more we say things about ourselves, the more they become true. So if they're going to be constant, and the same with the self-aware borderline community, if you're
Yes.
going to be consistently saying I'm a narcissist, I'm a narcissist, well, you're cementing that belief in yourself. But the good thing is, if you can admit you have a problem, you can at least try to work through it as long as you're working through it.
Yeah. I think this conversation really is about so two professionals talking about can a person change, right? This is not translatable to whether or not you should stay in your relationship. Like
Okay.
that is a
Good distinction.
yes, yes, because it is very difficult, most of the time, never, that a narcissistic person gets better in the same context of the same relationship. So most of the time, there has to be a breakup in order for the catalyst for that person to change. That is very, very common. And so they can change, but they probably won't change for you. They probably won't change
Right.
with you. And so that's the difference. The difference is that when I'm working with somebody that has a diagnosis that way or experiences themselves or has been told by their partner that that's who they are, I believe and I have hope for them, but I don't always have hope for that relationship. That's the
Right.
difference.
That's a very good distinction because that way people aren't holding on to hope this one in particular person will change. Because, like you said, chances are they probably won't in that context.
In that
But
context.
when we all say there's this kind of epidemic of narcissistic traits and emotional immaturity right now, it would be a shame if none of them could improve. It would be a shame if none of them could ever do better in some way. So,
Yeah.
and I think if someone does recognize they have some of the traits of narcissism, which a lot of people, if they're honest with themselves, I think would say they do. There's a lot of people who have them. So if they're honest, they'll recognize that. That yeah, it gives you some compassion for them. Like,
Mm.
okay, I understand. No one's perfect. And now, granted, I'm not ever saying that someone's abuse of others is going to be okay or
Mhm.
anything like that, but just no one's perfect, and to have some of that grace and understanding, and maybe just feel a little gratitude that it's not you. It
Mhm.
wasn't you that shows that, like as a kid, that kind of unconscious. What would you call that when you're a child? When like they say that's when personality disorders develop, right? You develop them in childhood, and you're not an adult yet. Your frontal lobe and your brain's not fully developed, but you choose this adaptation, or what do you call that?
I call it a survival pattern. So that's another
Okay.
word from Pivot is that we create a reaction based off of the message that that we received about the world. You know, is it safe? Am I loved? Am I enough? And then when those answers are no, then we have to create an adaptation or a survival path,
Okay.
the pattern to protect ourselves. And the more difficult a childhood is, the more stringent the survival pattern might become. And one thing I wanted to say is I had an experience of myself being narcissistic. I had a previous marriage prior to this. I'm currently married, but I was married really, really young. And I had really no coping skills. I had a terrible, very challenging childhood. And I had this idea of my partner, my husband then, being a direct expression of me. So
Hmm.
anything he did, I was responsible for. Don't embarrass me. Don't, like, and so I felt so anxious about how he was making me look that I was very probably even abusive and controlling to him. But it came from this deep fear of not being enough, or, lots of things in my childhood that I had to eventually take responsibility for, ownership for, and shed. That's a tendency towards narcissism as a control mechanism to make yourself feel okay based on somebody else's behavior.
Right.
And so, yeah, I mean, it can happen where you have this awareness. And I mean, lots of tears and lots of apology post divorce for me and my ex-husband, and then now like an amicable relationship. But he certainly did not deserve that from me. And the two truths thing, I did the best that I could with what I knew. And I was a terrible person to him. And at the same time, now that I know better, I can do better.
Right. And that's a big part of it, what you just did there too, though, the taking of accountability. And that's where it would be a real apology, right? Where out of 3 parts of an apology, you say you're sorry, then you take accountability, and then to truly take accountability, you have to change your actions, right?
Right.
And part of the taking accountability is owning your side and owning how it impacted other people. And that's basically what you just did. So
yeah. And it becomes intolerable to narcissistic personalities when they experience themselves in shame, because shame means I'm wrong. So I have to be able to say, I was wrong, I did wrong, but I am not inherently wrong. And that's where we break that cycle of narcissism, because I don't hate myself for this. Man, I wish I didn't do it, and it hurts and it sucks, but I'm capable of getting better, and I'm capable of love and compassion, and I just have to learn how to be better at it.
Right.
And so I can love myself and not hate myself as much, especially in the process of owning that responsibility, but knowing that it's not because I'm inherently bad. I wasn't just born bad or evil. It's just that I didn't know any better, and now I do.
And I think this is an important perspective for people to hear, regardless of what side of it they're on, too, because I do think it helps if you understand where people are coming from. I think it helps you to let go of resentment, regardless of which side of it you're on. Where I say this a lot with people had a narcissistic parent or something, or an abusive parent. If you think about it as, and like you said earlier, maybe this was happening to them as children, their parents were doing it to them, and just understanding that's just how it happened. Like maybe they were doing the best they can, but it wasn't good enough anyway. But both of those things can be true at the same time.
Yeah.
That it just helps. It just helps with the way I would see things today, because I'm all about what's going to help you see this in a way so that you can be the happiest and healthiest version of yourself. Anything outside of that, I don't think is too useful.
Being human is hard work. It is not easy or linear. It doesn't always make sense. It's hard for everybody.
Sure.
And especially when we're young, when we haven't been parents ourselves, when we haven't had experiences, through the spectrum of life, it's difficult for us to tolerate that idea that it's hard for everybody, right? Like we expect our parents to have made it a better experience for us. We expect them to have done better. And it's just not the case, man.
Right.
Like sometimes it's just not the case.
And I think, and the reason why I even brought that up in particular, there was someone I was following on Instagram the other day. I don't remember who, but they were saying about how that whole, what I just said basically was kind of BS. They said, oh, it's BS that they tried the best they could. They should take more ownership. They should take more accountability. And I said to myself, I failed to see how that really helps me personally. It's like, what good does it do you as a person to have your parents take more blame and accountability? Like if they're not willing to do so already, how is it going to help? I didn't understand.
Well, it also gives your power away, because if I can't be okay unless you take responsibility, like that's never going to happen. Like I have to be okay regardless of that. Sometimes we don't get the closure that we want. And so being in neutrality, being in choice, being an autonomous person means that I get to, and I should be okay, even when people that have abused me in the past did the best they could and didn't take any responsibility for it. That sucks. It's not great, but I'm okay. And I can be okay because that's a choice that I can make.
Right. And I totally agree with that. And Fran here, she says, I like how you established taking responsibility for your choices and not do the blame game, personal awareness. Very much true. And in regards to what you were just saying with that, all we can do is our side. I mean, once it's outside of our side, what else can we do at that point? It's like,
that goes back to your boundaries question too, right? Like, okay, so all I can do is mine. If you don't meet me in a space that makes sense for us, and I have two choices. I can either create more distance, or I can create less distance, right? Like
Right.
if we can bridge the gap together, then we have less need for discernment disclosure. And if it's not working out, then I have to create more distance between us, and that's the boundary issue. Yeah.
Sure. And I think another big thing people get caught up on is forgiveness. What are your thoughts on forgiveness? And because I can tell you what my thoughts are too, but what are your thoughts on forgiveness?
Um, I don't think it's completely necessary. I think that when we've been talking about like great minds in psychology on this episode. And one of the other ones is our writer. I don't think he even writes, but he's a speaker. His name is Anthony DeMello. And he has a book out called Awareness. And the book is actually just a transcription of it's like almost like a prophet in some ways.
Okay.
But he talks about whatever you hate or denounce or are vehemently against, you marry, because it's the same energy of attraction. So the harder you are against it, the more you call it into you. So if you are so set on not forgiving, it's like you're marrying it. So
Interesting.
it's that. So like either you're so good with it, it's fine, or you're not good with it at all. That's two ends of the spectrum. There's a middle neutrality on it's not fine, and it also doesn't run my life. Like I don't have to forgive you, and I also don't have to harbor all this non-forgiveness in myself.
And we don't need to get into the specifics of this, but I see that all the time in the political world, for example. People get married to whatever their thinking process is.
Yes.
And a lot of those people, they don't really seem like the happiest of people to me, regardless of which side they're on with it. And that's a whole different discussion though, too. But do you remember what your first date 5 questions to ask? Do you remember what they were?
So it's based off of another pivot thing. I don't remember the exact questions, but I can tell you that
I have them here for you.
Oh, well, let me take a crack at it. But there's 5 things that you should ask. It's to be something physical, something spiritual, something intellectual, something emotional, and I'm missing them, financial.
Yep. It says, what do you like to spend your money on? What's your favorite holiday? How do you manage stress? How do you like to spend your time? And what is the coolest thing you learned this past year? And in the article that you wrote, which reminds me of 2 things, you have a podcast. Do you want to say what your name of your podcast is?
Yeah. So the podcast is Me First Mindset, where we're cultivating what happens when you put yourself first and how that empowers you to be the best person for yourself so you can be better in your relationships.
Very good. And these articles that I pulled that from, is that from a website or?
Yep, that's drbrea.com. So that's my kind of my central hub for everything that I'm offering in this moment right now. So you can find the articles there, and then also a couple other cool things that are on there.
Cool. I just want to make sure you got those plugs in there for those. But those 5 questions, you broke down after each one of them why they were important.
Yeah.
And I think the money one is a cool one because, what do you spend your money on? You learn a lot about their interests. You learn a lot about what their priorities are, what they're putting first in their life. So I think that's a great question.
Yeah.
What else? And then the holiday, you get the spirituality part of it, right? Where you think a lot of ladies these days say Halloween's their favorite holiday.
Yeah.
So, like I hear that a lot, at least where I am. And then how do you manage stress? That's a huge one too, because if someone's going to be saying, oh, well, I like to binge drink every weekend to manage stress, or
I don't know, I have all kinds of stress and I don't know how to manage it. That's probably a red flag. That's a awareness issue.
So all of that kind of stuff, and I think they're good questions to ask just to get the conversation going. A lot of times too, that can be a struggle for people in the dating world. But overall, as a relationship coach, what other struggles are you seeing out there? Do you see, because you work mostly with women? I work mostly with women at this point too. It used to be the other way around. I used to work with more men. And men and women, they both have struggles. I think they just look a little bit different.
Yeah. I would say the biggest struggle that I see, I have kind of a polarized plate right now. I have women that are post-divorce, that are in the next stage of a relationship, maybe looking for dating. And then I have this other very interesting younger population of women who are asking themselves these questions of, why do I keep attracting the same people? Why do I keep playing out? Like, honestly, I get a lot of the abandonment issue. Like, why
Mm,
do these men keep leaving me? And I love working with these women because it's so tender and so like, I don't know, like there's just so much, there's richness for personal development there, and they get it so quickly. It's not about the guy, man. It's not about
right.
it's hardly ever about that. It's always about your personal relationship with yourself first. That's how you build your security. It is so possible. It just feels like it's not, but it's possible to have a secure sense of self even without a relationship, and then keep that when you get into a relationship. You got to
So
start
the
there.
wo- right. So the women who struggle with that, do you see some common behavior themes or common mindset themes that they have?
Yeah, most of the time they are very unconscious about their dates. It's like, well, how did you meet him? Like, what questions did you ask? Well, I didn't ask any questions. He chose me, right? He gave me affection.
Mm,
He said he liked me. So the biggest um, predictor of whether or not I'm going to enter into a relationship with this person is that they like me. Do you
mm.
like them? Well, I don't know. I never thought of that.
You know what? I hear that a lot too from
Cross
women.
my
When I,
mind to care about whether or not I liked it or not. Well, does he meet any of your needs? Well, I don't know. Like, how about your values? Like, do you have,
right.
what's your family like? Like, what's your shared, I don't know. I didn't think of any of those things. And so,
Yeah, I do hear that. I hear women who say, "Oh, this guy, he really likes me and he's putting in all this effort, so I feel like I should." And it's
mhm,
like, well, it's probably not the best reason just to think like you should
right.
just because you're putting in the act. Like you don't want to feel obligated or like he's giving with strings attached or something. And the
Oh, he's
flip side for
and he's got
men,
a job and he's stable like that. That's probably why you feel like let's clear that up. That's probably why you feel like you can only have one or the other thing. It doesn't have to be this guy that you have no attraction to, and or the guy that's super toxic. Like there are in between things where you can have these fiery passionate attractions to people that have stability. Like that is a thing. You just have to be open to it and then not settle for the other things. There's a lot of people that are going to be toxic. There's a lot of people that are going to be like that aren't going to be your fit. That doesn't mean you stick with those things. That's not your only options. Hold out for the possibility of someone meeting you where you're at and you are cultivating an attraction with at the same time. It's
right.
possible.
And I think a lot of that, like you said, the work is done before they're even in the relationship. It's like,
Right.
how are you before you enter? And I see people say all the time they'll want the sex of a toxic relationship, but with the stability of the healthy relationship, right?
It's
That's the dream,
possible.
right? That's
It's
the dream.
possible. I mean, that is, in my opinion, a pretty neutral or low standard. Like that is possible, especially if, but only if you know who you are first, you know what you want out of your life, and you can communicate clearly because nothing is sexier than a woman or a man who can say what they want in the bedroom or otherwise. But if you
Right.
can't even vocalize what you want, you're not going to get that.
Right. And a lot of people just don't even know what they want, period. Like you
Right.
said, they'll want the person that wants them. And from the
Yes.
man's perspective, what I hear is, oh, the woman's sleeping with me, so I'm just going to keep on going. And that's sadly, that's as far as it goes for their
Yes.
thinking a lot of times. It's not like they're thinking, oh, I have a choice here. It's like, well, this woman's sleeping with me, so I'm going to stay.
Mhm.
So,
Yeah, back to that value proposition. Okay, is that how are you feeling about that? What does it feel like to you? Does that
right.
feel stable? Does that feel, we just dig into the feelings of like, are you happy? Are you fulfilled? Is this going to tick the box for you long term? What is it? What's the pros list of staying versus the pros list of leaving? Like what are you missing out on if you keep staying with this relationship? You might be missing the next, more aligned version of your life.
Sure, sure. And I think one final question here. I think this is a good one to end on here too. But what would you suggest for people in terms of red flags? How do you know when a red flag truly is a red flag for yourself and
Yeah.
when you should really walk away? Now, and maybe by definition, a red flag is a red flag, and there's a yellow flag would be a little bit different. But do you tell people, yeah, how do you know when someone's really crossed one of your hard lines? Do you have like any pointers for someone that's trying to figure that out for themselves?
I think that it goes back to curiosity and conversation. So let's say that we give everyone the benefit of the doubt. And when we have the first presentation of red flag, we're curious. So we say, hey, that seems like, here's how I'm hearing this. like give them an opportunity to give you some information about it. And then once you give them that opportunity to speak to it, have a candid, honest discussion about it without judgment, right? You want them to present their truth. And then you make a decision after that. And sometimes a red flag isn't like they're a terrible person. It's just not a fit for you. So you don't even have to have a whole bunch of judgment on it. Like, okay, that's just not an alignment for me. Not that I have to feel like you're trapped. One thing that I want people to get is that you do not have to catastrophize a relationship to leave it. It does not have to be blown up. It doesn't have to be a red flag so terrible. Like, I don't need permission to leave a relationship that's not a good fit. If it's just not a good fit, it's not a good fit. It doesn't have to be so dramatic.
I like that.
To leave a relationship when it's a first sign of like, actually, I'm not really feeling, especially in the beginning, when you're starting to make these first choices, give yourself permission to leave when your intuition says that's not good, even if it's like pretty okay. It's all right too.
And that's rare too, right? Where people, there's a difference between compatibility issues and then someone who is kind of operating in dysfunction or some trauma or wounds or something. But you don't hear too much about just the compatibility issues. A lot of people don't seem to have the emotional maturity to say, hey, we just want a good match. It's always a lot of catastrophizing out there, like you said.
Yeah. So I think that you see the presentation of a red flag. First of all, know what your red flags are. That's got to be personal. Write them down. Like, these are my non-negotiables. That's red flags. These are the things I will not, some things on mine were like, if they're rude to wait staff, if they're rude to their parents.
That's a big one. Yeah.
Like those are red flags. If they, if they aren't good, with money, if they don't have whatever it is, you write your own non-negotiables down. And when those do come up, then you get curious about them, you ask about them, and then see what you like or don't like from that interaction and relationship and that conversation. And then you make your decision based off that.
Yeah, that makes total sense. And I lied. I think there's one more question that you piqued my interest about. You said it's very possible to have a good sex in a non-toxic relationship. Yeah. What are your suggestions for that?
It's that it really is, first of all, choosing that for yourself. Like, all of us, there are variations, but we're sexual beings. Like, that is one way that we connect with ourselves and other people. So just like how you cannot have stability in your relationship, neutrality in your relationship, or security in your relationship without having it for yourself first, you've got to learn how to be your own source of self-pleasure. Do it for yourself. Do yourself first. Be really interested in that first. Learn what turns you on. Be a big advocate for your own needs. And then create the bravery, the container with another person to vocalize that. Be the teacher if you need to be. And then also allow yourself to be taught as well. Again, don't take it so seriously. Bring some play into it. And that gives you good, honest, secure, vanilla relationships. Sometimes can have these beautiful, intimate, explosive, dynamic sexual relationships in them as well, because you're open to it, because you're exploring that for yourself, and because you're asking for it.
Right. And then the curious part, an open-minded part, an understanding part, that goes a far way with that. Do you think there needs to be polarity for that to be a thing, or do you not really believe in that as much?
No, I don't think so. I think that if you need the polarity in that, well, you can create polarity. You can create these experiences for yourself. It's back to capacity, right? So can you create space for polarity to exist in the context of play in sex?
Right.
And it not have to be in every other aspect of your relationship? Yeah, you can. But you have to be able to create space for it and prioritize it and learn about it and try it out. You have to have time, energy, and effort towards that to be able to make. If you're not trying, like, you didn't learn how to play basketball really well after just like watching somebody else do it or trying it once. Everything, even a great sexual chemistry between two people, takes a willingness to learn and some curiosity and sometimes time to build skill.
Yeah, I mean, and then once people get comfortable with one another, usually it gets better as time goes on, if you're comfortable with one another. But if someone's not comfortable, I think what I see a lot is people, they just stop. Mm-hmm. They don't anymore after a while, and they get into these comfortable ruts, so to speak, and they kind of get this feeling of stuck.
Yeah, and you can kind of start to bridge that gap with soothing touch or neuroaffective touch. So when you touch your partner in non-sexual ways that soothes their nervous, like hand on the back or a
Sure.
prolonged hug or like scratch in the head, like the more times you do some of those kinds of sweet, very like neuroaffective touch, the more you're priming the relationship for a deeper sexual, intimate experience.
Yeah, that makes sense to me.
Yeah.
Well, Dr. Bree, anything else you want to touch on today?
I think that, if you take nothing else from this, I think that just remember that you're so much more capable for yourself first than you ever thought you were. And that all stems from that. So if you can reprogram your initial operating system, your core belief to really root into the fact that you are capable of almost anything that you want, especially self regulating, that's the step towards having your wildest dreams come true in your relationships and otherwise.
Yeah, self-regulating. Amen to that. And where can people find you?
You can find me on Instagram at Dr. Brea. I think it's Dr. Brea since the
Yep.
other part was taken. And then also Dr. Brea, all spelled out on .com and also on YouTube. Same.
And if they want to work with you, can they reach out on Instagram or reach out to Pivot?
Either way. So I think that if you want a more candid response when you have a conversation with me, reach out to me, DM me on Instagram so we can get to know each other. And then we'll decide from there, like where it goes.
All right, very good. Thanks for coming on the show, Dr. Bree. I appreciated our conversation.
Great conversation. Thanks for having me. Have a great rest of your day.
You as well. Thank you again.